Hi everyone, this is Russell Sensei. Thanks for checking out another one of my videos. So I've had a number of people ask me on various platforms, what's the best way for them to approach reading? Because I write novels for Japanese Learner, it's a pretty common question for me. Um, and first I want to talk about how I approach this as a learner, and then I want to talk about what I learned about it as a language teacher. So my first Japanese book was the Japanese version of Harry Potter, the first book. And when I first started out, I looked up everything. So if there was a kanji I didn't understand, even if I knew the word or what the meaning was, if I didn't remember that kanji, I would write it down. And of course, any vocab or anything like that, I'd look it up, write it down with the definition. Um, to the point that I had about 3,000 entries in my little notebooks that I was keeping track of everything on. Now, when I was first starting this, the first page took me about 2 hours to get through because it was taking so long, stopping on so many words, looking up every individual thing, even just for kanji I didn't know. So partway through, I transitioned to just, you know what, I'll look up words, but only if I need to. I want to be able to actually enjoy what I'm reading. And it's not enjoyable if I have to stop every sentence. I can't enjoy the flow of the story when it keeps getting broken up. So I switched to that, and that in combination, of course, with all the work I did at the beginning of the novel, led to me eventually being reading, I think it was about 20 pages an hour instead of one page in 2 hours. Um, I will make one note. As I mentioned, I was writing everything down in a notebook. If I had thought of it now, I would probably be making cards in Anki or a similar flashcard program like that instead. Now, it's really important, the difference between these two approaches, one looking everything up and one just looking things up as needed, it's not that one is better than the other. It's that they're different, okay? If you want to be doing some like hardcore studying, super focused, yeah, look everything up. But a lot of people do that too much at the beginning and they burn out and then they end up just giving up and not having interest in language. The fun thing about learning a language is that you can actually enjoy things in that language. So at some point, it's perfectly reasonable to just say, you know what, I just want to be able to read this for enjoyment. Yes, it's going to help my Japanese, but that's not my focus. I'm just going to enjoy it. Okay? Now, as a language teacher, um, I have a slightly modified approach to this. So what I always tell my students is, okay, if you're ready to study and you're ready to put in the time, the number one best way you can use a reading resource is you read it once, looking up all the various words that you don't understand, anything like that. Hopefully you've chosen something not so far beyond your level that there isn't too many, but look up everything, make sure you understand everything. And then you go back and you read it again. And you read it enough times that your final time reading it should just be a read that you can enjoy. You're not being broken up. You're actually just being able to sit down and read the story. Because there's a different thing that happens when you're looking up everything individually. Yeah, for short term, you're probably remembering those individual words, but your brain isn't really soaking in like the overall flow of the story, how those sentences are put together in different situations. Um, so you need to look things up because you need to understand, but you also need the uninterrupted reading just so you can get a natural feeling for the language. And if you've seen any of my stuff before, you know that's a very key, important point to me. Okay. Um, so again, yeah, if you really want to study, sit down, read it, looking up everything, and then read it again when you can read it more smoothly. Now, if you're going to read through a novel, obviously don't do that the whole book. You know, read a few pages or one page, depending on your level, look everything up, and then read through again. Or maybe look everything up page by page and then read through a chapter. It depends on what flow you find works for you. Now, if you are interested in starting to read Japanese novels to up your Japanese level, I do highly encourage it as long as you're at a level that it's manageable, and you'll find that out pretty quickly. There are a few things you need. So one is an appropriate book to read. So I chose Harry Potter for a couple reasons. One was I knew the story, so I thought, and it was true, that that would help me understand little bits that I maybe missed in the Japanese, and to know I was on the right track if I read something. I could confirm it by, oh yeah, I remember that happening. Okay? The other thing is youth novels in general are pretty good for intermediate language learners, intermediate advanced language learners, because they're not quite so boringly simple as kids' books, but they're not super complex like some other novels. So they kind of find a nice mid ground there where they can hold your interest without being overly complex. And the nice thing is when you're reading in a second language, even if it's something that in your native language you would find a little boring and simple, in your second language, it's harder to be bored by something that's too simple because it doesn't seem simple to you. You're putting in the work to understand it. So it's okay if it's a little simple as long as you're still finding it interesting. Another nice thing about youth novels, for Japanese particularly, is that they often have furigana, the little hiragana pronunciation guide, over top of at least the difficult or rare kanji, at least the first time or two that it gets used. So that makes it a lot easier to look up words you don't understand, or remember kanji that you don't know with that little guide there. The other two things important for picking a book: one, just interest. Okay? Little variances in difficulty among a similar category of books are much less important than you actually really being invested in the book and wanting to read it. That's super important. Without motivation, you're not going to get anywhere. So you want a book that you're going to really want to read. Um, the other thing is, though, you do have to choose sometimes um, about how much you like a certain book. So, for example, Harry Potter worked well for me because, well, there are some random words in Harry Potter, like Wingardium Leviosa or something like that. That's all in katakana. And because I'd read the English one, I knew what that was. So I didn't have to learn a whole bunch of really random Japanese words. Now, I also happen to like Tom Clancy books and the Lord of the Rings series. So I've read both of those as well. Or rather, I should say, I started reading. So the Tom Clancy books I've read, but I did have to put up with learning a number of words that I'm not going to need to really know in everyday conversation. Generally, like military and political terms and stuff that are needed in the book, but aren't particularly useful to my Japanese knowledge. That being said, I found the books interesting enough that that was fine. And hey, it never hurts to learn more words, even if they're a little less likely to come up in regular conversation. Lord of the Rings, I started reading that, and I should probably go back to it now that my Japanese level is better. But it's tricky again because it uses some unique language. So try to find a good fit level wise, and definitely find something you're really interested in. The other two things you need, one of them is really obvious: a good dictionary or just a dictionary app. If you're getting a dictionary app, I'd recommend finding one, and there are a few out there, that let you look up a kanji character by drawing it. Because unless you have a book that has furigana for everything, there's probably going to be a point where you come to a kanji character and want to look it up. And it can be a little tricky and time consuming to do. Usually the easiest one is if the app lets you try and draw it on the screen and it can guess which character it is. And then you can choose one to confirm. The other thing that I really highly recommend is this. So this is a grammar dictionary. One thing I found out really quickly when I started reading Harry Potter, which again was my very first novel, was I couldn't look everything up in the regular dictionary because some of the things that I didn't know weren't words per se. They were different conjugations and grammar structures and stuff like that. And they just didn't appear in the dictionary. So at first I was, asking some of the Japanese people around me because I was living in Japan at the time, but that gets old pretty quick. I didn't feel like bugging them all the time. So the nice thing with these grammar dictionaries is, unlike a textbook where it's set to take you from lesson to lesson, it's organized like a dictionary alphabetically with grammar points. So if there's something you don't understand, you're like, you know what? That looks like it might be a grammar thing rather than just a word, or it just doesn't show up in your dictionary. you can pull out your grammar dictionary, look it up, and it'll have some examples in there, and generally it'll give you a pretty good idea of what it is that that grammar is supposed to mean. So anyways, just to wrap up, you want a book that you're really interested in. You want a book that's hopefully not too far out of your level. The more difficult it is, the more you really have to be interested in the book. And when deciding whether you're going to read and look everything up and then read again, or just read, it's just a matter of how you're choosing to spend your time. So if you're like, you know what, today I have enough concentration and focus to do an hour of really good study, then yeah, look up everything, make sure you understand absolutely everything, and then read it through again. That's going to be the best way to improve your level. But don't burn out. If sometimes, it's between, I don't have the focus to study right now, so I'm not going to do anything. Or, you know what, I'll pick up this book and just enjoy it. Obviously, picking up the book and enjoying it is really important for language learning and language enjoyment as well. So don't let not having the focus or energy to study, or just not feeling like studying at the moment, be a barrier. Because honestly, well, there's some language things you might miss if you're just reading through the book and only looking up things when absolutely necessary. That's also a really important part of language too, getting a sense of the flow and how things are going, without it being broken up all the time. So I generally recommend a mixture of both. Anyways, so these are my thoughts on how to learn Japanese through reading novels or really any written materials. If you have any comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. I'll take a look. Same if you have any suggestions for new videos that I should make. And again, subscribe somewhere around here if it's popping up, and check out some of my other videos, which should be popping up around me. Thanks again, and see you next time.